You're the strong one. You handle things. You keep it all together, even when you're falling apart inside. But what if the version of you the world sees isn't who you are, but who you had to become? This video will show you 5 ways people hide from themselves without realizing it, and what it takes to finally return to who you were before the mask. Because some people vanish without ever leaving, and the scariest kind of hiding is the one where even you don't realize you've disappeared. They wake early, they keep lists, they move fast, talk sharp, and fill every hour. They're the ones people admire for their drive, their discipline, their success. They're seen as high-functioning, focused, reliable. They always have a new goal, a new project, a new reason to stay busy. But behind the pace is a silence, because this is the first kind of person who hides from themselves, the achiever. On the outside, everything looks impressive. They're doing what the world celebrates, growing, building, producing. But on the inside, something else is happening, a quiet numbness, a disconnect, a haunting question they never slow down enough to ask: who am I when I'm not achieving? The achiever learned early that their worth is conditional, that to be loved, they had to earn it, that rest is laziness, that feelings are inefficient, that stillness is dangerous. Maybe they grew up in a home where achievement was the only form of attention, or in chaos, where control was the only safety, or maybe they simply absorbed the deeper cultural myth: you are only as good as your output. So they learned to run fast, forward, always ahead, and never inward. Carl Jung would say the achiever lives entirely in the persona, the socially approved mask we wear to fit into the world. But when we identify with the persona too completely, we lose contact with the self, the deeper self, the whole self. The achiever avoids this deeper contact because there's something inside they're not ready to feel: unworthiness, grief, fear, shame. And as long as they stay moving, they don't have to feel it. Signs you may be living as the achiever. You get restless during downtime. You feel guilty when you're not being productive. You over-identify with your work or goals. You avoid emotional conversations, preferring action. You fear being ordinary. On the surface, it looks like ambition, but deep down, it's a shield. The achiever often confuses value with validation. They chase the next title, promotion, milestone, hoping it will finally bring peace. But no matter how much they achieve, the emptiness doesn't leave, because the wound isn't healed by achievement. It's healed by presence, and presence is the one thing they never make time for. You'll hear them say, "I just like being productive. I can't sit still. That's just how I'm wired. I feel useless when I'm not working on something." But underneath that language is a deeper truth they rarely speak. I don't know who I am without all this. The tragic irony? They become everything society admires and still feel invisible, because what people admire is the surface, not the soul. And the cost of this mask? It's not just burnout, it's spiritual disconnection. They lose touch with what they love. They stop noticing beauty. They forget how to play, how to rest, how to simply exist. Even their joy becomes strategic. Even their healing becomes achievement, tracked, measured, posted. Healing for the achiever begins with a question: what am I afraid will happen if I stop? That's where the truth lives. They're not afraid of failure. They're afraid of being with themselves, of hearing what the silence has to say. Because deep down, They worry that without success, there's nothing left. But that's the lie they inherited, not the truth. Ask yourself, do I feel panic when I'm not moving forward? Do I know how to rest, not as a reward, but as a right? If I stopped trying to prove myself, who would I be? Because your worth isn't in your hustle, it's in your being. And being isn't earned, it's remembered. You'll know your healing when you rest without guilt. You create without needing applause. You slow down and feel more alive, not less. You choose presence over performance, not because you've given up, but because you've finally come home. The achiever hides by being admired, but admiration is not intimacy. Praise is not peace. Success is not soul. And the soul longs to be felt, not fixed. You don't have to stop achieving, but you do have to stop disappearing behind your success. Because the version of you that the world loves is not as important as the version of you that feels. They're the calm one, the mediator, the listener. They hate drama. They avoid conflict. They're always trying to keep things okay. They're the ones who say, it's not worth arguing about. Let's just move on. I don't want to cause a scene. But inside, something tightens, something clenches, something whispers, you disappeared again. This is the second kind of person who hides from themselves, the peacemaker. They don't want to fight. They don't want to offend. They don't want to make things harder than they already are, so they compromise. They adjust. They say yes when they mean maybe and nothing when they mean no. They seem serene on the outside, but underneath there's suppressed resentment, swallowed anger, buried desire. Because when you avoid all conflict, you eventually abandon yourself. The peacemaker usually forms in homes where emotional expression felt dangerous. Maybe one parent was volatile and they learned to tiptoe. Maybe they were punished for talking back. Maybe they were the middle child constantly negotiating peace. So they learned harmony is survival. Disagreement is threat. Stability matters more than truth. They never had space to develop their own opinions because keeping the peace became more important than being real. Carl Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And for the peacemaker, that terror lives in the risk of saying something honest and being met with tension. So instead, they avoid. They become agreeable, neutral, pleasant, and over time, that neutrality becomes numbness. They don't know what they want. They don't know how they feel. They just know when someone else is upset and how to make it stop. Signs you might be living as the peacemaker. You agree with people just to keep the conversation smooth. You feel anxious around arguments, even between others. You often downplay your needs. You feel responsible for keeping everyone around you okay. You rarely express strong opinions. You think you're keeping the peace, but often you're just keeping yourself quiet. And silence is not peace. The peacemaker's life can look gentle from the outside, but inside they're slowly eroding. Not because they don't feel, but because they've learned not to show it. They carry everyone's comfort and carry none of their own. They believe that love means not causing waves, but love without honesty isn't love. It's fear in disguise. What's hiding behind the mask? Rage, desire, grief, the need to take up space, to be real, even if it's messy. But for the peacemaker, messiness feels dangerous, so they clean up inside and out, until even they don't recognize their own voice. Ask yourself, do I confuse peace with avoidance? When was the last time I said what I truly think without softening it? What am I afraid will happen if I speak up? Because healing doesn't come through harmony alone. It comes through truth. Even when the truth shakes the room, you'll know you're healing when you say no without guilt. You let others feel uncomfortable and don't rescue them. You express disagreement kindly but clearly. You feel your anger and use it as insight, not shame. The peacemaker fears disconnection, but the real disconnection is the one they feel from themselves. And the cost? Intimacy. You can't be loved for who you are if no one ever gets to meet you. You don't have to fight, you don't have to scream, but you do have to show up honestly, not as a mirror for everyone else, but as a voice, a shape, a soul. Because true peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the presence of truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And that kind of peace starts within. They're the life of the party. They make everyone laugh. They tell stories with perfect timing, light up every room, and keep the energy moving. They're warm. They're magnetic. They always know how to change the subject before it gets too heavy. They seem happy, effortlessly happy. But if you sit with them in silence for just long enough, you'll notice something behind the eyes, a kind of tiredness, a flicker of sadness, a quiet emptiness they've spent years trying to outrun. This is the third type of person who hides from themselves, the entertainer. At first, you'd never guess. They don't seem lost. They don't seem anxious. They don't seem like they're in pain because they've built their identity around making others feel good, and that works until they're alone. Because the thing about constantly lifting others is that you never let yourself fall. And without falling, you never learn how to land. The entertainer often grew up in environments where emotional expression wasn't welcomed, where pain was inconvenient, where heaviness was met with discomfort or silence. So they learned, if I want to be accepted, I need to keep things light. They became the comic relief, the fun one, the distraction. And now, even as adults, they still use performance to stay safe. Because being serious, being real, feels far too exposed. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow as everything we suppress. The entertainer's shadow isn't rage or darkness. It's sadness, stillness, need. They've hidden these parts so long, they believe they don't even exist. But they do, and they're quietly asking to be seen. Signs you may be living as the entertainer. You use humor to deflect vulnerability. You feel pressure to keep the vibe up. You avoid deep or emotional conversations. You feel uncomfortable being alone or unproductive. You fear being labeled as too much or too heavy. You smile because it's easier. You tell stories because silence makes you nervous. You play the role so no one ever has to see the truth. But the truth doesn't disappear. It just waits. What's the cost? You feel surrounded, but not known. You feel liked, but not understood. You give others joy, but don't allow yourself peace. The applause gets loud, but the loneliness gets louder. The entertainer doesn't mean to deceive. They're not fake. They're protecting something sacred. The child inside who once made everyone laugh so no one would notice how scared they were. But healing isn't found in performance. It's found in presence, in sitting still, in letting go of the need to fix the energy, in trusting that you don't need to entertain to be loved. Ask yourself, what would happen if I didn't make this funny? What if I shared something real without dressing it up? Do I even know what I feel when no one's watching? Because somewhere beneath the mask is a depth you haven't touched in years, a sadness you've labeled too much, a tenderness you've hidden behind a grin, and it's waiting to be held. You'll know you're healing when you speak with honesty instead of charm. You let moments be quiet and don't rush to fill them. You cry and don't apologize. You feel sad and don't perform your way out of it. And maybe, for the first time, someone sees you, not just the joy you offer, and they stay. You don't have to be the one who holds the room together. You don't have to sparkle when your heart is tired. You don't have to be fun to be worth loving. Let the laughter rest. Let the lights dim and meet the part of you that's been waiting in the quiet. They're composed. They're rational. They think before they speak, and usually they don't speak much at all. They're the ones people turn to in crisis because they seem solid, unaffected, grounded. They don't do drama. They don't cry in public. They don't let emotions get in the way of what needs to be done. They'll tell you, I'm just practical. Feelings complicate things. Thinking clearly is more important than feeling deeply. And slowly you begin to admire them, or resent them, or wonder what's really going on under that calm exterior. Because there is something going on. This is the fourth kind of person who hides from themselves, the Stoic. On the outside, they're unshakable. But on the inside, a storm they've trained themselves not to feel. Not because they're cold, but because feeling once led to pain, and they swore never to go there again. So they climbed up into the mind and built a fortress there. Many Stoics grew up in environments where vulnerability was dangerous, where emotions were dismissed or punished, where being strong meant staying quiet, where feelings were a luxury no one could afford. So they learned to override their heart in the name of survival. And now, as adults, they call it maturity. But it's not maturity. It's emotional exile. Carl Jung might say that the Stoic has over-identified with their thinking function, leaving the emotional body, the feeling function, neglected, underdeveloped, denied. They intellectualize pain. They explain suffering. They analyze love. They narrate their lives instead of living them. But beneath the analysis, there's a soul that longs to feel. Signs you might be living as the Stoic. You struggle to access or describe your emotions. You prioritize logic over empathy, even in close relationships. You feel uncomfortable when others are emotional. You rarely ask for help. You dismiss your pain by comparing it to someone else's. You think, if I just stay clear, I'll stay safe. But clarity without feeling is not wisdom. It's insulation, and no one can reach you through a wall of logic. The Stoic doesn't intend to shut people out. They just don't know how to let anyone in without unraveling. Because for them, unraveling feels like weakness, loss of control, danger. So they stay composed, even when they're crumbling. But the soul was never meant to live only in the mind. We are emotional creatures, even when we pretend not to be. And unprocessed emotion doesn't disappear. It calcifies. It shows up as tension, as fatigue, as isolation, as a quiet sadness that has no name, because it's never been allowed to speak. Ask yourself, do I think about my emotions more than I actually feel them? Do I rely on detachment to stay in control? What would happen if I actually let myself break? Because healing doesn't come through understanding alone. It comes through surrender, not surrender of thought, but inclusion of feeling. You'll know you're healing when you name your emotions without embarrassment. You let people see you in moments of struggle, and you don't rush to fix it. You cry and don't justify it. You allow tenderness, not just strategy. Because strength is not in how much you suppress. It's in how gently you allow yourself to feel. The Stoic is often praised for their composure, but behind composure is often grief. Grief that never had a witness, never had space, never had words. You don't have to stop thinking, but you do have to let your body speak. Let your heart move. Let your spirit feel. Not everything needs to be explained. Some things are meant to be lived through. Not every truth needs words. Some are only known by tears. And not every moment needs to be held together. Some are meant to break you open so you can finally meet what's been buried for years. You're not weak for feeling. You're human. And it's time to come down from the tower and sit in the fire of your own truth. You'll survive it, and you'll come out more whole than you've ever been. They fall fast. They feel deeply. They dream of the perfect connection, the one that finally makes everything make sense. They're the hopeless romantic, the soul searcher, the one who believes that somewhere out there is someone who will finally make them feel whole. They say things like, "I just haven't found the right person yet." When it's real, I'll know. Love is supposed to complete you. But underneath those words is something fragile, because this isn't just about love. It's about longing, longing for self, disguised as longing for another. This is the fifth type of person who hides from themselves, the romantic. They don't mean to lose themselves in people. They don't set out to chase fantasies. But they've learned to look outside for what's broken inside, and love, or at least the idea of love, becomes the mirror. The romantic usually carries a deep wound of abandonment or neglect. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes it's subtle. A parent who is physically present but emotionally distant. A childhood where their inner world was never understood. A life where being loved always meant performing, pleasing, or disappearing. So they build a dream, a soulmate, a savior, someone who will see them, really see them, and finally fill the emptiness they've never been able to name. Carl Jung might say they've projected their anima or animus, their inner feminine or masculine, onto another person. They don't just fall in love with someone. They fall in love with what that person represents. Wholeness, meaning, self, and that kind of love is always haunted by illusion. Signs you might be the romantic. You idealize people quickly, then feel disappointed when they don't match the fantasy. You feel incomplete when you're not in love. You confuse intensity with intimacy. You believe they'll fix me more than I'll grow myself. You fear being alone, not just logistically, but existentially. You don't just want a partner. You want a mirror, a reason, a rescue. But love can't give you back the parts of yourself you've abandoned. The romantic often ends up in unbalanced relationships, chasing those who can't meet them, pouring into those who don't reciprocate, or staying with someone too long just to avoid the silence of being alone. They believe they're fighting for connection, but often they're avoiding self-confrontation. Here's the deeper pain. They fear that who they are alone is not enough. That without love, there's no meaning, that solitude equals emptiness. But that's not truth. That's an old story written in the absence of real presence. Ask yourself, do I fall in love with people or with what they represent? Do I fear being alone because I don't know how to sit with myself? Am I looking for healing in someone else's eyes instead of my own reflection? Because no partner can give you what you've never given yourself. No relationship can sustain the weight of your unmet needs. No one else can complete a story you've never dared to write alone. You'll know you're healing when you enjoy your own company, not as a backup, but as a choice. You stop idealizing others and start humanizing them. You love not to be rescued, but to relate. You no longer collapse when they leave because you never left yourself. The romantic isn't wrong for wanting connection. That desire is human, beautiful, sacred, but when it becomes a substitute for identity, it becomes a mask. And masks don't just hide your pain. They attract the very people who'll deepen it. You don't have to stop loving, but you do have to stop abandoning yourself in the name of love. You have to stop mistaking chemistry for destiny, drama for depth, intensity for truth. Because the one you've been waiting for has always lived in the silence you were too afraid to sit with. So sit, feel the ache, feel the absence, and watch as that absence becomes the doorway back to your own soul. By now, you've met them, the ones who stay busy to avoid themselves, the ones who smile to hide the ache, the ones who don't speak because they've forgotten how. Maybe you've seen yourself in more than one, and that's okay, because hiding isn't failure, it's adaptation. A quiet agreement you made with the world when you were too young to speak your truth. You learned to please, to perform, to protect your heart by building a life that looks good from the outside. But there comes a moment, often quiet, often alone, when something inside whispers, "I miss me." And that whisper is sacred. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." So much of what we think is who we are is really who we became to survive love that didn't know how to hold us. But survival isn't the same as wholeness. And masks, no matter how beautiful, get heavy. So what now? You don't need to tear everything down. You don't need to run away. You don't even need to fix yourself. You only need to begin telling the truth, even quietly, even clumsily. The truth about what hurts, the truth about what you long for, the truth about the versions of you that you buried just to be accepted. You can live without a mask, but it will cost you the comfort of being liked by everyone in exchange for the freedom of being known by yourself. That's the trade, and it's worth everything, because on the other side of hiding is home, and home is not a place. It's the moment you stop pretending and finally breathe as yourself.